As Isabella finds herself entangled in a world of werewolves, how will she confront the violent nature of Alexander and Lucas, and her own place in this world? Follow Isabella's perspective and explore the unknown territory of werewolves. Subscribe to keep the journey going. 28 Isabella SP. OV. You're okay now, love. Please don't cry. Alexander's soothing voice mumbled in my ear as I buried my face in his chest, his thumb reaching and wiping away the tears that hasn't stopped flowing down my face. I couldn't stop shaking. Even when Alexander handed me his hoodie, I was still shaking. Not from being cold, but from the events that only took place moments ago. I was almost raped, Lucas killed a man, and I was now back with Alexander, someone who I'd never thought I'd see again. For the past 5 minutes Alexander had been attempting to get me to stop surrendering and to calm down, but all I could think of was his heavy weight on top of me. As I pushed at his chest, but he didn't budge. I wasn't strong enough for him. Alexander had pushed open the door to one of the rooms, quickly setting me down on the bed that was placed in the center, quickly making his way over to the window, shutting the curtains as if he was still trying to block me from the secret that I already knew. I want you to tell me what happened. I can't help you if I don't know. Alexander kneeled down in front of me, placing his warm hands on my knees, sending shocks up and down them, which instead of disgusting me like they used to, I accepted them. It helped me calm down. I shook my head. I didn't want to say the words out loud. I didn't want to relive it everyone again. If it was up to me, I'd just pretend nothing ever happened, and in the morning, I will just move on and forget about it. Alexander's face reddened slightly as he took deep breaths, as if he had to stop himself for shouting at me, until his head snapped to the door, which quickly slammed open to reveal a boy who I didn't particularly want to see. Alexander, the pack has been overthrown. Caleb needs further instructions on what to do next. Lucas didn't look at me once as he made his way over closer to the bed. He was acting normal, like not just a couple minutes ago he had just wrapped his hands around another human's throat and killed them. Just like that. That's when Richard's words rang in my head. Alexander was a murderer who killed innocent children, women and men, and from what I just seen, Lucas wasn't any better. But I couldn't trust Richard's words. Was he just saying that so if give him what he wanted, so I would start to trust him so he could get to me? Alexander glanced at me, his eyes softening slightly before he regained to his full height, his hand reaching out to wipe the tears that were still on my face before he leaned down, planting a short kiss on my lips. Lucas is going to bring you to the car. I'll be there as soon as I can, Alexander stated before he turned around to face Lucas walking towards the door, about to leave. My eyes widened when I realized he was going to leave me alone with Lucas. Any other time I was be glad I was with Lucas, but now that I had just seen him doing what he just done, I don't think I can look at him the same again. I thought he was so innocent that he, out of everyone in Alexander's pack, would have a bit of kindness in him. Maybe what Damon and Ollie told me is true. Maybe everything I was told about Alexander and his pack was true. No, I don't want to go anywhere with you, I stuttered through my sniffles. They were making me doubt myself now. I thought I was safe with Richard, but it turns out he was sick. What if they were just like him? Alexander stared at me, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion, as just minutes ago I was letting him kiss me. Now I refused to go with Lucas. His eyes then flashed to Lucas, the bright blue color now looking glazed over, as he seemed to be having a conversation with him in his head. I remembered reading about this. Werewolves could mind link each other. Suddenly Alexander's calm stance turned into one that was the opposite of calm. His face started to get redder as his bare arms started to fist up as he clenched them so tight each vein looked like it was about to pop before the glazed look left his eyes and his eyes snapped to mine. That bastard almost arsped you, he growled out before he began to take strides over to me. I could hear his heavy panting before I thought he was going to get mad at me, only his hand reached out, taking a hold of mine and pulling me up so I was in his chest again. I'm sorry, his voice sounding different, muffled by my hair as he tightened his hold around me. Being in his arms made me feel secure. I felt my Richardac drop. It wasn't his fault. He didn't have any part in it. I squeezed my eyes shut and pulled the hood over my ears, attempting to block out the screams and the cries coming outside. It's now been around a half an hour waiting in the car. Lucas basically threw me over his shoulder after I refused to go with him and walked me out to the car. As I was outside, I got glimpses of the horror that was going on. We were now sat in the car, the blackout windows preventing me from seeing what was going on, but the screams and shouts indicated what was going on. People were crying, screaming, and shouting. I wanted to do something. I wanted to check on Damon and Ollie. I could maybe persuade Lucas, but in the front seat sat two men who remained silent the whole time. Was Richard's words true? Was Alexander out there right now taking part in this, killing innocent people? I didn't want to believe Richard. His words now meant nothing to me, but after seeing Lucas so easily do what he'd done and no think twice to do me otherwise, Yes, I probably know he only did what he did because he was trying to protect me, but he didn't have to go so far. The only noise in the car was my sniffling and my sobs every couple of minutes when I would hear another person cry out for help. Lucas remained silent, his gaze in me as I stared ahead, trying to block out the sounds. Suddenly the door beside me was pulled open, making my head snap up to see Alexander with a man standing beside him. My eyebrows furrowed in confusion when he reached out and grabbed me from my seat. My eyes flashed down to see his hands covered in dried up red and bruises, making Richard's words ring in my head again. The cold night air hit my bare legs as Alexander pulled me into his warm chest, his hand on the back of my neck as his heavy breathing filled the air. Lucas, go get the other car. We are staying in the hotel tonight. The land is available, Alexander stern commands to his brother, making Lucas not hesitate and quickly follow through with the actions. I sighed a breath of relief when Lucas left. Every second in that car made me want to turn around and start screaming at him, asking him why he just did that and how he was so okay with it. Alexander then moved his hands to my waist as he quickly pushed me into the car that I was once in. Shutting the door, the screams were no longer, and it was just silent, other than now the two men in the front of the car were speaking to each other. Love, you don't have to cry. You're okay now, Alexander's voice soothed as his hand reached up, wiping the tears I didn't even realize were flowing down my face. There was so much I wanted to say, scream even, but nothing would come out. It felt as if my mind was screaming but my mouth wasn't working. I wanted to hit him for keeping the secret from me for all those months. Lucas killed Richard was all I managed to mumble out as I stared at the ground. I didn't want him to respond yet. I was waiting for him to say something that would help me, like Lucas didn't kill another person. His silence only made it confirmed, making me just shut down. I let out a sob as I felt his warm arms pull me into his side as his hands gently stroked my hair. 29 Isabella SP. OV. We should be back in a couple of hours. We are leaving now to get back on the road. Make sure the borders are covered at all times. Any problems, contact Caleb. Alexander's irritated voice sighed from the room. I took a deep breath, leaning against the locked bathroom door, closing my eyes for a brief second. Not a wink of sleep I got last night. Every time I shut my eyes I seen Richard, his sick face staring at my own. Between that and Alexander constantly asking if I was alright, I got no sleep. Baby, are you ready? Alexander's voice asked, his fist knocking on the bathroom door, making me jump. I didn't understand why he was being nice to me. Maybe it was because I was being a little bit less of a brat, or he felt sorry for me. I quickly glanced at my reflection, cringing at the result. My hair was an absolute mess, my face stained with tears, and the joggers Alexander had gave me looking like a blanket. As soon as we got into the room last night, he demanded I change from the clothes I got there. I didn't mind, it's just for once I had clothes that fit me and that weren't massive. I turned quickly, unlocking the door. At some point I think Alexander was going to snap me for something. As soon as I opened the door, his hand reached out to grab mine as his eyes looked over at me before he raised his eyes at the tank top I was still wearing. Most of the morning he had tried to get me to change from it, but it was roasting. I shifted quickly, pulling on my seatbelt, as now it was only Alexander and I in one of the cars, Alexander driving and me in the passenger. I think I preferred the other men in the car. It meant that I didn't have to talk. My eyes glanced to Alexander to see his hands on the wheel, only his eyes looked glazed over. He was talking to someone else through Kind Link. He still didn't know that I knew his secret. How did you find me? I asked, attempting to snap him out of his mind link phase. I wanted to see if he was going to tell me anything yet, if he was going to tell the truth. I knew Richard. I figured out his hiding spot, Alexander carefully answered, glancing over at me, his bright blue eyes looking bright as he started up the car. He was careful not to say too much. He wasn't lying, but he also wasn't telling me the honest truth. He was taking out the parts where I'm guessing he sent wolves to track him or something. But how? I mean, he didn't leave any clues as to where he was, and he wasn't hiding, I questioned as I watched as Alexander's hand grip onto the wheel tighter, his knuckles slightly turning white. I knew he hated it when I asked questions. He was so impatient that he probably didn't have time to answer me. Trust me, love, I was always going to find you, he mumbled out before taking his eyes off mine and onto the road as he pulled out of the parking spot. His jaw was clenched tightly and his chest was moving up and down. I knew he was trying his best not to snap at me. If this were a few weeks ago, he's probably just ignore me, but he's trying. I so badly just wanted to tell him that I knew about what he really was. Maybe then he would let me ring my family, let me actually be outside and not stuck up in the room. If I already know, then he can't hide anything else from me. I know your secret, my mouth blurted out before I could even stop myself. In an instant the car jolted to a stop and I instantly regretted my confession, wishing I could have gave it more than 5 seconds of thought. "What did you just say?" Isabella Alexander's chilling voice asked. He already knew what I said, he was just checking to see if I was going to say it again or not. I turned to him to see his eyes staring into my own, his once blue eyes now turning into speaks of gold. I knew this was bad. Whenever his eyes did this he got very angry. "Forget it," I mumbled, turning around to face the road again. I knew he wasn't going to, but at least I could try. I hoped that he would just continue to drive, but then again I wanted him to bring it up. I wanted to ask him so many things. "That bastard showed you, didn't he? He showed you someone shift into a werewolf. What else did he say? What other bullshit has he told you?" Alexander's deep voice growled out as I felt his warm hand reach out and land on my cheek, softly pulling my face around so I was now looking at him. My anger flared up as I felt rage from inside. Richard may have just been using me for revenge, but he told me the truth and I only known him for hours. I was with Alexander for months, and not once did he mention the fact he was a werewolf. At least he told me the bloody truth. "More than you ever done," I raged. If he got too angry, then I was allowed to be outraged at this. "Are you fucking with me right now? Are you being serious? You're actually defending him? You're defending that monster after what he did to you?" Alexander's loud voice made me want to shrink to the back of my seat, cower away, but I wasn't going to let him win this one, not this time. "I'm not defending him. Can't I be pissed that for months, Alexander, you didn't mention anything? I was up in that room not having a bloody notion about anything. Do you even care how confused I was? Richard may have told me just to get back at you, but at least he had the decency to actually tell me the truth." I breathed. I was expecting Alexander to do something drastic, go crazy at me, but his silence only scared me more. He was never this calm. He closed his eyes for a brief second as if he had to calm himself down before he said something back to me. "I was trying to protect you. Can't you see that everything I have done is for you, is for your benefit only? Now that you're open to all the werewolf stuff, you're in a lot more danger. Baby, do you know the amount of enemies I have? Richard is just one of many, and many of them would use you to get to me." He drifted of. He turned to face me, his now blue eyes with no traces of gold looking into my own. He had calmed down now as he reached over his body, leaning towards mine. "I knew I was going to have to tell you, and trust me, I was going to. I just wanted to wait until the right time when you trusted me and didn't look at me as such a monster anymore." Alexander continued, his voice dropping deeper as he pushed strands of hair out of my face. I sighed. I wanted to believe him, and the more he talked the more I got lost into the different colors of blue of his eyes, and everything he said I didn't doubt. His hip breath fanned my face, and all I wanted to do was reach over and press my lips against his. Something clicked in my head. He was still the heartless man who stole you from your bedroom and refused to let you see or visit your family. Nothing has changed. I quickly moved away from him, shrinking back in my seat, keeping my eyes stuck on the ground, kicking my feet on the floor of the car, as I felt his eyes burn into my head. "Just drive," I mumbled, attempting to change the subject, regretting that I even mentioned anything. His fist connected with the wheel as he cursed under his breath before he yanked open his door, making his way out, slamming it shut. My eyes followed his movement in confusion as his large frame took large strides around the front of the car, pulling open my door. "No, I'm not letting you do this. We are sorting this out now. I'm sorry, alright? I'm fucking sorry for being the worst mate you could ever have. I know I've said some and did some shitty things to you, but please, Isabella the First, just don't want to lose you." Alexander's voice was the softest I've ever had him speak before, so quiet that it was barely even above a whisper. He held his tan hand out to me and I stared at it for a moment before grabbing it and letting him pull me out of my seat, not because I was scared that he would get angry, because I wanted to. "All I want is for you to forgive me, Isabella. I can't take back what I've done, but I'll try. I'll try to be less possessive. I can't promise that I'll be fucking amazing, but I can promise you Isabella the First will try." He sighed as his hands went to my waist as he pushed me against the car door, causing it to slam shut. For once I believed him. For once the sparks that erupted from his touch didn't make me feel sick, or how his hot breath fanned my face didn't scare me. "Hi, I'm Isabella the First," mumbled, holding up my hand for him to shake. If I was going to get past everything, we would need a fresh start. He shook his head, the corners of his mouth turning up slightly as he let out a chuckle before he connected his hand to mine, pulling me up to his height and placing his lips on mine. 30 Isabella SPOV. I ran my hand along the edges of the car seat, my eyes flickering to the right to see Alexander in the same position, one hand hanging loosely on the wheel while the other was stretched over on my knee. My eyes glanced outside to see the same scenery I have been looking at for the past hour of driving on the road. Green tiers after trees lined up creating a forest atmosphere. My eyes glanced in the mirror to see the black jeeps following behind as they have done since we left. For most of the journey I was sleeping and Alexander just woke me up an hour ago, asking if I needed to go to the bathroom or anything. I felt weird. My heart believed Alexander's words. I thought he was actually going to try change, but there was still a feeling that I shouldn't get my hopes up and be prepared to be stuck up in that bedroom. But what did this mean? Did he mean he was going to actually let me explore around the lands? Let me see all the things he has been hiding from me, or was all the stuff coming out of his mouth empty promises? I shook my head, shaking the negative thoughts out of my head. This was a fresh start. I can't think about the past events. He was going to try, and that's all that mattered. I felt his hand squeeze my knee as my eyes snapped to his to see that his were flickering from me to the road. What are you thinking? He asked, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion as he was genuinely interested in what was going on inside my head. If he'd asked me this before, I would have been angry that I couldn't even keep my thoughts private, but now I could tell by his face he was just asking out of curiosity. I just shrugged in response. I couldn't exactly say that I was worried that he was going to lock me up and shield me from the outside world, now could I? I knew he couldn't change overnight and his temper was going to take time to control. I leaned my head back in the seat, closing my eyes, letting the quiet sound of the radio take over once again. I wasn't tired. I actually wanted to just get out and run. My legs had been cramped in the same spot for that long. After a few minutes of just feeling Alexander's warm hand on my knee, I felt him squeeze it this time. I peeked my eyes open, glancing over to him to see that the car was now no longer moving. I want you to forgive me and trust me, but I know it's not that easy. I kept you from your family, Isabella, and trust me, it was the hardest thing to hear you cry at night and not being able to tell you it was okay because I knew it was a lie. I know nothing I can do can take back all those months, but I'm willing to give it a good shot, Alexander sighed, shaking his head. My eyebrows furrowed in confusion as he spoke. I thought we had already gone over this morning. My gaze then left his eyes to look out the front window to see the house that I'd thought I'd be spending a boring summer at. My eyes then flashed back to his wide. What was he trying to do? Was he messing with me just to get me upset or something? Go, I'll be back for you in a few hours, love. His next words shocked me, and it took me a few moments for them to register in my head, as I had to make sure that I had just heard right. I pounced forward, wrapping my arms around his neck, earning a small breath of laughter escape from his lips as he reached behind me, clicking of my belt and pulling my whole body over, so I was now straddling him in the front seat. But I didn't care. I didn't care about anything that happened before now. He was letting me spend time with my grandma alone. He was giving me something I never thought he would even consider. Go quick before I change my mind, he mumbled. I hoped he was joking, but to be sure I quickly pulled open his door and jumped out of the car. There was so much I wanted to say to her. Ask her, and it would give me another opportunity to ring my family. Tell them I was finally okay, that for the first time in months I felt happy. Hey, no kiss for that. Alexander's hand gripped my own, stopping me from moving any further. I turned to see a smile played on his face as I leaned down, quickly placing my lips on his only for a second as I pulled away, my lips tingling. I quickly turned around and began running towards the house I thought I'd never enter again, hearing Alexander's laugh in the distance as I got further away. I smiled at my grandma as she poured another cup of tea into my mug that had already been refilled Alexander times in the last hour, as she shoveled as many treats into me as she could. It was now dark outside, and after hours of just endless conversations, crying, talking, and some more crying, we had finally both calmed ourselves down and began to eat dinner. Not that I was hungry from the amount of cookies she basically shoved down my throat. That day Lucas brought you to meet me broke my heart. I wanted to pull you back, of course, and when you started crying all I wanted to do was comfort you. But I knew it would make things worse. I knew that the only place for you was with Alexander. It gave me comfort knowing you were safe. She continued her story as she proceeded to scoop too many spuds on my plate. She knew about the whole werewolf thing, which I already assumed days ago when I was thinking about how my whole life was a lie. She had grown up here, had my dad here, and basically grown up with wolves. That confirmed the fact that my parents knew, which I kind of hoped they didn't, but I guess they already did. We knew it was a risk letting a teenager come here, but I thought that there was a slim chance of you finding a mate or even having a mate. I thought if you didn't go to their territory then you would be safe. I should have kept a closer eye on you. Grandma's voice wobbled once more as she sat down across from me. My eyes stung from the amount of crying I had done. Firstly, when I first seen her I burst into tears. Then a little while later when I called my parents and got to speak to Kyle, and now. It's not your fault, he would have found me sometime. I attempted to lighten the mood. I knew I had only a little while left, and so I didn't want to spend it crying. She gave me a weak smile before wiping her eyes as she dived into another conversation, her eyes lightening up as she talked about the latest Kardashian drama. I just hoped that this would be a regular thing. I sighed, pushing my wet locks out of my face as I ran the brush through my hair. I had now took a shower and felt less disgusting as I tried to steer my mind away from his hands touching my body. My clothes that I brought from England were still packed in the suitcase in the same exact spot as I'd left it. I would now be finally able to wear clothes my own size and not constantly borrow Alexander's massive t-shirts. I pulled on my jeans. These defiantly were not missed, but I liked the way I had clothes that fitted me, so I wasn't going to complain. I then pulled on one of my jumpers I had packed, tucking it in as I closed the suitcase up again. Hey, the familiar voice of Alexander made me jump as I span around to see his large frame leaning in the doorframe. I smiled, although I didn't feel like smiling. I wanted to stay here with Grandma. There was still so much I wanted to talk about, and I needed to spend more time talking to my family. But I knew I couldn't say anything. I didn't want to risk any future opportunities. I was grateful to him for this. I needed this. It showed that his words weren't just empty. He was going to try give me more freedom. He was going to treat me like an adult and not a child. His eyes glanced towards the suitcase before he made his way into the room, picking it up effortlessly. It was filled with clothes as I packed 2 months' worth of outfits that I never got to wear. I'm going to miss seeing you wearing my t-shirts all the time, he smirked, holding out his hand for me to grab. I started at it before looking up to his face. He was changing, and that's all that mattered. That once cold stone man who stared at me with a hardest expression wasn't there anymore. It was the real Alexander, and for that I grabbed his hand. 31 Isabella SP. OV. I tugged on his wrist harder in an attempt to make his body move faster as his feet trudged even slower until he came to a complete stop midway down the hallway, the elevator only a few steps away, causing my own feet to come to a stop as his grip pulled me back closer to him. I snapped around, staring daggers at his blue eyes, which were staring down at me, glinting slightly as a small smirk played on his face as he watched me every second that passed, knowing how impatient I was to get going. Not so fast, love. There are a few things I need to talk to you about, he chuckled, prying my grip of his wrist as he leaned his broad frame against the wall. Your hand doesn't leave mine. I mean it, Isabella, you don't know where you're going. I don't want you wandering of. You have never seen my people, but they know of you. There will be a few stairs, but I've already wanted them. The pack land is far too large to show you all today, love, so you'll have to be patient, Alexander explained as he took my hand and wrapped it in his, pulling me towards the elevator. I rolled my eyes as a response, biting on the inside of my cheek to stop myself from making a remark. He was trying to be civil, and I didn't want to mess things up and be stuck in that bedroom again. My eyes scanned the scene playing out in front of me, getting wider by the second as my gaze landed on the street. Alexander had finally stopped at letting me look for more than 2 seconds as he previously was. Eyebrows furrowed in confusion as my eyes followed the road lined with shops and littered with children, women and men running around. A girl that didn't look past the age of 21, child balanced on her hip, and another tugging on her hand, pulling her towards one of the shops. I glanced up at Alexander to see he was too preoccupied to look around him, as he was reaching his hand into his back pocket, pulling out something. Ever since we had stepped foot out of the elevator, Alexander had been almost always silent. His grip on my hand tightened like it was claimed on there. His mouth was set in a straight line as no trace of a smile ever being placed there was evident. He gave the same hard, cold look to anyone that even looked up at him, which was just one man, but as soon as his eyes met Alexander's they flew to the ground again, not bothering to glance at me. My eyes skimmed over the people. They looked so normal. They looked like humans, not the beasts that they actually were. I felt Alexander's pull on my hand as he began taking more of his long strides down the street, pulling me closer so that our sides were touching. I let my eyes follow up to Alexander's face once more, only to see that his other hand was now holding a cigarette as he opened his mouth, puffing out smoke. I stopped in my tracks against Alexander's pull as I stared up at him, wide eyes. Was this another thing that I didn't know about him? He stopped once he realized I wasn't beside him, glancing back at me, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion, seeing my confused face before he glanced around him as if remembering that we were in public. Isabella, what's the matter? His tone took me by surprise, laced with annoyance, so cold compared to just half an hour ago when it was laced with comfort. I placed my hand on his wrist, attempting to pry his hand grip of me. If he was going to speak to me like that, then I wasn't going to bow down to him. I wasn't going to be the same little naive girl like before. This seemed to anger him further as his jaw clenched, and he then grabbed my other hand prying of his own before he glanced up for a moment before I felt him push me towards a building. I opened my mouth to begin to shout at him only for my mouth to be covered by his large hand as I felt his other arm wrap around my waist and pull me over his broad shoulders. I began to push into his back only to be ignored when he pushed a door open before taking strides inside and I heard it slam shut. Before I could regain my balance in an instant I was off Alexander's shoulders and now pressed against the wall. I felt his hot breath on my neck as he took deep breaths, his chest moving heavily as he tried to contain his anger. I swallowed the lump that was beginning to form in my chest, my eyes wandering around his bloody perfect face, forgetting in the moment why I was so angry when I caught glimpse of the cigarette that was hanging out of his mouth. I reached up cringing as my fingers touched the death trap, pulling it straight out of his mouth and dropping it to the floor, not wanting to touch it for more than a second before I reached over my van-covered foot Richard Ping on it. Alexander let out a breath, shaking his head as I turned to face him one more, the closeness of his face to mine only making my heart rate pick up as I stared down at my feet. I was pissed off at him and I wanted it to stay that way. "You're unbelievable, Isabella, fucking unbelievable." He shook his head before regaining his full height, his hot breath leaving my face as I saw the corners of his mouth turn up. "I didn't know you smoked," I mumbled, pushing myself off the wall, stepping side him so the room could be in my full view. My eyes wandered around to see an office desk littered with papers and a large chair in the center of the room. I looked to see him shrugging in response as he looked at me, his eyes not one of those cold monster eyes he held a few minutes ago, but the same eyes filled with love. "You're so bipolar sometimes, Alexander. You act so bloody kind one minute, and the next you're such a dick," I continued, shaking my head. I wasn't going to let this one drop. He let out a breathy laugh at me, as if what I was saying was a joke. "It's an act. Do you think I want to be fucking harsh to you in front of them? I'm an alpha, Isabella, and if I want respect from my people then they need to fear me, and how are they going to fear a man whose only weakness is their mate? I need to show them I have no weaknesses." He raised his voice slightly as he shook his head. "I thought everyone had a mate." I asked what would make him any different for caring for his mate if everyone did. He closed his eyes for a brief second, taking his hand up to his head, and for a brief second I thought he was getting angrier. You too. The corner of his lips turned up slightly. "Love, you're so fucking innocent," he mumbled, breathing out a laugh as he strided over towards me, his hands grabbing at the edges of my denim jacket. "Yes, baby, everyone has a mate. But I'm an alpha, Isabella. If my people see me letting you act like that in public then their opinion on me will change. Don't get me wrong, love, act what you like in front of me. I enjoy seeing someone stand up to me, but when we are out, that's when it can't happen," Alexander explained. I furrowed my eyebrows, biting my lip as I attempted to hold back a smart response that probably wasn't necessary. "Small baby steps. Then since you were being a dick, you can make it up to me." I let a smile grow on my face after a few moments' silence as he looked at me. This time a confused look rode over his face. "Haven't I done enough?" He groaned, his expression playing a small smirk on his face, narrowing his eyes once I pushed the side of his arm. For once things were actually good. 32, Isabella, slow down. My bones may withstand a crash, but yours sure as hell won't, Alexander's voice laced with seriousness exclaimed as his large hands was placed on top of my ones, taking control of the wheel for himself as I jammed my foot into the brake, the impact causing the car to skid forward. "Fuck me. I thought you said you had a bit of experience," Alexander continued, shaking his head as his hand reached over, pulling the keys out of the ignition, preventing me from causing any more damage. I was barely even going 10 miles per hour. "These cars are different to English ones," I defended my awful driving skills that honestly he was blowing out of proportion. It wasn't my fault that the last time I sat behind a wheel was almost a year ago, and it was only in a golf cart. It was now only 20 minutes into my so-called driving lesson, which Alexander promised to take me on last night after the eventful day yesterday. I looked at him, rolling my eyes as he shook his head as if he couldn't believe I was that bad as I reached my hand over, attempting to grab the keys out of his hand. "Baby, I told you slow. This is your first time ever behind a wheel. I don't want you crashing into any of the fences and ruining my truck," Alexander teased, although kept the seriousness in his voice as he leant back in the seat beside me, which in his truck was one big long one, as he resistantly handed over the keys. I gripped onto the wheel. For at least 10 minutes before even stepping foot inside the car, Alexander stood explaining that this truck was not only a truck. It was a machine or something like that, and if it came out with a scratch I wouldn't even get to look at it again. Crash. Where? We are in the middle of a bloody field. Good to see you care more at the state of your car than me. I narrowed my eyes looking over at him, to which he just shook his head, his hand reaching up to my cheek and forcing it back around to look at the road ahead. Don't get jealous now, Isabella. Alexander's deep voice breathed out as I felt his heat from his body radiate towards my own, making me want to shift around. His hot breath was on my neck, and between that and him screaming directions I couldn't concentrate. I took a deep breath, attempting to ignore the fact that today Alexander was wearing the tightest white t-shirt I have ever seen. His muscles literally ripping through, so when I looked that's all I could see. The last few days, that's all I could think about, and I needed to knock it out of my head. I shouldn't be falling this fast. He's unpredictable. And not to mention he's a bloody animal. I needed to remind myself nothing had changed. Okay, slowly lift your leg. Alexander's hand landed on my leg, attempting to help, only for me to stare down and lift my leg, suddenly the car jerking once again. I groaned, anger rising in me as I raised my hand, slapping the steering wheel. This happened almost every bloody time I tried to start this truck. I'm sure it was the car and not me. That's it, I'm not driving again. I'm done. I sighed in frustration, reaching over to unbuckle the seatbelt that was strapped around me. The only thing preventing me from not jerking forward with the car every second. You need patience, love. You won't be able to drive in 5 minutes. You need practice. I can't bring you out, Richardoro. I'm stuck in training all day. I can see if Lucas can. Alexander. My thoughts haven't drifted to Lucas since a few days ago. There was so much I wanted to yell at him. Why did he have to go and ruin things? I trusted Lucas. He was like my bloody brother, yet even thinking about being in the same room as him at the moment made me want to be sick. I don't think I could look at him the same. I just shook my head. I'll just say I feel poorly or something, Richardoro. What I remember, Lucas's driving skills weren't all that good either. I have an hour before I have to go to the pack house for a meeting, Alexander began as he pulled me over top of him, his body sliding into the driver's seat. I'm not going, I interrupted, placing my hand over his mouth, leaping towards him to get him to stop talking, so that I could get a word in before he started to make plans that I wasn't going to agree with. I can do my own thing. Remember, I'm not a child. I know about the whole like Wolfie thing now. I don't need to come with you. I don't need a babysitter. I'm perfectly capable of staying by myself. It's not like I'm going to run away. I know I'm stuck here. I rambled while I had the chance as stifled mumbles of laughter erupted from behind my hand, as he attempted to pry it away with one of his hands, the other wrapping around my waist, so I didn't slide away. He successfully pried my grip of his face, a mixture between pulling my grip of and being a child and sticking his tongue out. This is the time I enjoyed with Alexander, when he was acting like himself, not yesterday when he was being so cold. I don't know what time I'll be back at love, Alexander sighed, pushing the stand of hair that had escaped from my plate behind my ears as I narrowed my eyes at him. Fine. He gave in after a few seconds of a stare off. He leaned forward, placing his lips on mine, sparks erupting as tingles shot down my lips right to my fingertips. Feeling like a quick few seconds later, I pulled my head back despite the growing tingles in my tummy that urged me to continue forward. Though you have a meeting, I mumbled, keeping my eyes strictly on his own blue ones, seeing flicked of gold appearing in them slightly as he let out a groan, his hand that had ridden up my waist pulling me closer once again. In an hour, he pointed out, his voice deep, raising his eyebrow before his own lips connecting with mine. No, again. This time staying there. I sighed, flicking through the same movie after movie that I had rewatched countless times before. I think I've watched To All the Boys I've Loved before a solid 5 times now, about to be the 6th. Alexander had been gone for the past hour, and by now it was starting to get dark. I rose up from the sofa. If I was going to watch a movie, then I needed popcorn and 7-Up. I'm not going to lie, being up here by myself bloody freaked me out a little, but again I was surrounded by wolves. What's a ghost? My eyes flickered over to the elevator at the end of the hall, quickly forcing back in the direction of the kitchen. I had been itching to just go down it since he left, but I promised that I wouldn't leave. Alexander wanted to show me around the place himself, and to be truthful, I didn't want to be wandering around a house full of werewolves on my own. I pulled open the cupboard, my eyes roaming around for a bag of popcorn when I heard the loud bang of the elevator chute open. My eyes flanked towards the door. Thank God he was back. I was bloody starving, and obviously, me being the extremely useless and untalented teenager, I am literally can barely cook a pot and noodle. Bloody hell, Alexander. You took your time. I'm starving, I moaned, pulling out the bag of popcorn and shutting the cupboard when a deep voice cleared his throat. I snapped my head around, and instead of meeting Alexander's ocean blue eyes, I was met with Lucas's green ones. My heart felt like it was about to bust out on my chest and land on the floor in forms of me as I snapped my head around, tearing my eyes away from his sight as I closed my eyes. Why did this have to happen now? Isabella Alexander sent me up. He's going to be home later than he expected. He wanted me to make sure you were alright. Lucas's voice mumbled as I closed my eyes tightly, taking a deep breath. How much I wanted to scream at Alexander right now was unbelievable. I'm alright, I mumbled, turning around, keeping my eyes on my feet as I made my way over to the fridge to grab a drink. The only noise in the room filling it up was his breathing. I clenched my jaw as I slammed the fridge door shut, not letting my eyes even glance up at his for a mere second. Lucas's pure innocent face contradicted his actions. He was so innocent, yet that night I swear he was a different bloody person. Isabella, Lucas's voice began as I made a move to walk past him, his gentle hand landing in my arm. Not long ago the same arm wrapped around someone's neck. Don't you dare touch me. Alexander sent you here to see if I was alright, and I am. You can go, I interrupted him, yanking his grip from my arm. I glanced up at his face to see his soft features furrowed up in confusion. I didn't want to be this mean to Lucas, but what he did makes me sick. As fast as I could I scooted out of that kitchen and back to resume my spot on the sofa. I usually felt safe around Lucas. I felt as if he was like another brother to me, and now I could barely stand to be in the same room as him. Really? You're pissed at me? I fucking protected you against that man. If I hadn't have showed up at that minute, where would you be? Unbelievable that I do something to protect you. And you are standing up for a rapist. Lucas entered the living room, his voice raised as his chest moved up and down heavily. I stared up at him. He had never raised his voice like that to me. He was practically shouting at me as his once pale white face now a bright red color as he clenched his fists by his side, practically shaking all over. You killed a man, Lucas. Don't you dare try and turn this on me. You put up this act like you were the innocent one. I began to rise from my position on the sofa to my feet as I felt anger bubbles begin to boil in my chest. He was trying to make it out like I was in the wrong. Sorry, I don't witness a murder every day. What do you think werewolves do? If you thought for a second Richard hasn't murdered someone, then you're more naive than I thought you were. It's in our fucking nature, Isabella. That's what we're brought up to do. You kill or get killed. Lucas was now full on shouting, his loud voice bouncing off the walls as they hit me like a ton of bricks. I didn't want to believe him. He was just going to try cover his own back up. He didn't want to seem like the bad guy, so he's starting to make up lies. Or was he telling the truth? Was Allie and Damon telling me the truth? Had Alexander killed people too? I shook my head, getting the thoughts to disappear from my head. Things were starting to go right. I wasn't suddenly hating every second I spent here, including trust, another word that came out of his mouth. Get out, Lucas. I don't want to look at your bloody face for another second. I felt tears burn at the side of my eyes, but I wasn't going to let him see me cry. Lucas now stood in the doorway, bent over slightly as his eyes higher into my own as his hand gripped onto the door frame, his knuckles turning white as if he was resisting something. He wasn't the Lucas I once knew. I can't stop thinking about that time, the time we kissed. I fucking am in love with you, Isabella. His next words shocked me as I stared at him for a few seconds just to make sure I heard him right. The time we kissed, all I could remember was the pain I felt afterwards. It felt like so long ago that happened that I could barely remember it. I opened my mouth to say something, shout at him, but nothing could come out. I didn't have any words to say to him. You kissed my mate. Alexander's deep growl from the doorway thundered out as I felt my heart that was bouncing all over my chest literally come out in my hand as I closed my eyes for a brief second. This was not happening. 33 Isabella SP. O.V. My hold on the popcorn I was gripping seconds before now completely let loose as I rushed towards the two brothers standing in the doorway. Alexander's huge frame towering over Lucas's smaller stance. Lucas's previous red face now completely washed away as his face now held the expression as white as a sheet. It was almost as if his red face transferred over to Alexander's, as his usual tan-colored face now began to turn a beetroot-colored as the moments passed. Answer me, goddammit, Alexander's voice boomed to the point when even I wanted to shrink away into the sofa and pretend like I didn't exist and wasn't about to witness my second murder. In all the times I have witnessed Alexander get pissed, I've never seen his bloody veins pop out as such. I thought he was about to burst as his face now mere inches from his brother's. His chest was bouncing up and down rapidly as he practically seethed anger. His question he already knew the answer to. All that could be heard in the next few seconds was Alexander's heavy breathing as he raised his hand towards Lucas, who remained silent, his eyes adverting everywhere but to Alexander's eyes. He shrunk in his shoulders almost as if he was already giving up this fight. Alexander's large hand collided with Lucas's shoulder, and he began to squeeze hard as his knuckles began turning white and Lucas's eyes squeezed shut. I closed my eyes for a brief second. All I wanted to do was to push past them and pretend Alexander wasn't about to kill his little brother, but I couldn't. It was my fault. Alexander, please. I began, my voice coming out more shaky than I had expected. I wanted to use a stern voice so he would listen to me and take me seriously, but I didn't know how this was going to turn out. Was he going to go back to the Alexander he was before? I braced myself for Alexander's anger to transfer over to me from getting involved in his argument. When Alexander was enraged from past experience, I know almost nothing could calm him. Especially not my intervention, it would only anger him more. His other hand that was free swerved to grab a hold of my waist and pulled me to the other side of him, so I was no longer between the two boys but was standing behind Alexander, his broad shoulders blocking me from Lucas's view. Bedroom. Now Alexander's tone growled out as he didn't let his eyes meet mine once as his hand pushed me towards the bedroom door. I opened my mouth to object to his orders. I wasn't going to let him speak to me like I was a child, plus I'm pretty sure he will thank me later for not causing internal damage to Lucas. He was acting if it wasn't any of my business, but Alexander murdering his brother over one stupid bloody kiss that I can barely even remember was my business. Kissed him? I exclaimed as Lucas's wincing started to become louder until Alexander's back in a quick movement swerved around, his deep blue eyes now fully disappeared, replaced by bright cold gold ones eventually meet mine. Alexander's eyes roamed my face as it scrunched up in anger before his eyes left mine and forced their way back to his brother. His anger now seemed to increase as his other hand made the way to the back of Lucas's neck as groans of pain erupted from Lucas. I quickly jumped backwards as Alexander swirled around, this time in his grip, slumped over Lucas as he began taking long strides down towards the elevator at the end of the corridor. Shit, nothing was working. He was going to kill his little brother. Alexander, listen to me, it was me. Lucas didn't do anything wrong. I began to ramble, my voice wobbling as I followed Alexander's long strides down the corridor. I didn't know what to say that would make it better. I guess my rambling did nothing to lessen the situation but rather push Alexander's temper even further as he reached the elevator, his fist basically punching the button as he kept his back turned from my view, holding a silent Lucas in his hand. Stop fucking talking, Isabella. Get in that bedroom before I do something that I will regret, Alexander spat out, keeping his back turned from me as the elevator opened, and he quickly pushed Lucas's limp and now soundless body in front of him. His voice came out calm. It scared me more than him shouting. This was Alexander. He was a monster this morning. Probably an act. Lucas's voice was ringing in my head. Kill or get killed. Who was I trying to fool myself? I was even stupider than I thought. I opened my mouth and hoped to knock a little bit of sense into Alexander before he did something he regretted, but within a second the elevator doors had slammed shut, and the two brothers were out of my sight. Shit. This was my fault, completely my fault. What did he mean he would do something he would regret? I couldn't stay up here and just wait for him to come back with news on whether he killed his brother or not. I don't care that right now every time I look at Lucas I want to vomit. I don't want to see him seriously hurt. Maybe a punch wouldn't be so bad, but Alexander doesn't know how to stop at one punch. My eyes flashed on the elevator button, my hand reaching out before I quickly pulled it by my side again. If I went down there, Alexander's madness would explode. He would go mental if I followed him. His anger would transfer to me and then back to Lucas, and it wouldn't end well for anyone. But maybe if I could talk to him for a minute, a few seconds, and maybe I could get him to think wisely. Before I could rethink and doubt my stupid decision-making process, I press on the button. No matter how much I think Lucas deserves a hit or two, I couldn't let Alexander do this. I closed my eyes, attempting to slow down my heartbeat, as the elevator descended downwards. My Richardac dropped as we got closer to the first floor, which seemed to take double the length of time it usually does. Where was Alexander's mum and dad? Would they not want to see their son live another day? I took a deep breath. My mind was going into overdrive as I prepared myself to be faced with a possibly bloody Lucas. It was one kiss, nothing to kill somebody over. Before I realized, the elevator doors dinged open and I stepped out, my eyes roaming the empty room before I spotted through a window a crowd of people, but they were blocking my view. I didn't hesitate before I rushed to the door, which was already open. However, outside was littered with people. Tall, wide women and men covered the outside that I was only able to step 1 foot outside. I felt wetness below my feet, only to realize that the only thing that covered me was one of Alexander's t-shirts and a pair of fluffy socks. I shook my head as I raised myself onto my tippy toes. This wasn't the time to be thinking about my outfit choice or myself for that matter. I attempted to scan my surroundings but was unable to see past the chests of the people around me when it dawned on me. I was surrounded by werewolves. Why weren't they doing anything? Why were they just watching this play out before them? Surely Alexander didn't have that much of a hold over these people. I stopped for a second. I've never been so close to this many before. Not without Alexander anyway. I felt my heart race quicken slightly as I realized I had no one to protect me now. Alexander was overthrown by anger. My safety was probably the last thing on his mind. I shut my eyes. My safety wasn't important, Lucas's was. It was my selfishness that got him in this position in the first place. I couldn't let him get hurt over me. Excuse me, my voice came out almost whisper like I didn't expect not a soul to hear. However, all the people surrounding me snapped their heads back as they stared wide-eyed. I took a deep breath. They won't hurt you, I convinced myself as I wrapped my arms around my body, feeling exposed as the wind blew at my already flimsy t-shirt. I began pushing past the crowd without problem as they moved out of the way, quickly avoiding skin-to-skin contact as if they were afraid of me. I quickened my pace until my vision met Alexander kneeling on the ground, his back towards me as a red-covered Lucas lay on the floor next to him. My eyes widened and all I wanted to do was turn around and run back inside and upstairs, wanting to erase what had now been engraved into my mind. I opened my mouth to say something, anything that would put a stop to this, when Alexander's head snapped around, his broad frame stretching up to its full height again. His golden eyes met with mine and I expected him to rip into me next, shouting at me, but his glance softened slightly before he turned to the person who was standing next to me, a woman, nodding at her before turning his back to me once again. My face scrunched up in confusion before I felt two hands being placed on my shoulders ever so slightly. My eyes shot up to the woman who now had a light hold on me as she began to gently push me back into the crowd towards the house. Once I realized what she was trying to do, I yanked her hands of me, pushing her away from me slightly as I attempted to get towards Alexander. I seen the soft look on his face, only for a second, but it was there. This could be prevented. I opened my mouth as more hands were placed on me, attempting to say something, but all that would come out was a cry as I felt the tears burning down my face. It was going to happen and it was my fault. Alexander's glance met mine once again, only for a second before he turned back once again. Lucas's previous position on the floor now gone as he was crouched up, spitting and wiping blood away. I as Alpha claim you as a rogue. You are banished from this pack, and if you are seen near or on this territory again, you will be killed on sight. Alexander's roar could be heard for miles, the people beside me adjusting their eyes to face the ground as if they were afraid his anger would transfer to them. I didn't know what any of this meant. Rogue. What did that mean? Once again I attempted to push forward, only for a pair of hands lift me off my feet, quickly carrying me towards his room. I'll be back. For her was the last thing in my earshot before the front door was slammed closed, and I was preventing from hearing anything else. What was he talking about? Lucas would be back for who? Me. Questions swarmed in my head, only adding to the now pounding headache. I took a sigh of relief. Lucas wasn't dead and Alexander didn't just murder his brother. The secrets of the werewolves won't wait. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss any updates.